Okay, now I'm going to beginning the teaching. I think we are still in Four Noble Truth. I think it's almost finished, right? I think that's so. Last time we talked about the truth of suffering, the origin of truth of suffering, the cessations of truth of suffering, and the path who leads into the cessations, Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths is, I think, really important subjects as a practitioner who practice renunciations and anything through the Four Noble Truths is really powerful. It's really move our heart into the Dharma through Four Noble Truths. So, and if the people, intellectual who wants to know about the Buddhism, also Four Noble Truths is really good to start, to understanding the Four Noble Truths, we'll understand the Buddhist concepts. So Four Noble Truths is one of the important subjects as a Buddhist practitioner, or even some who just wants to know about Buddhism. Also Four Noble Truths is important. So last time we discussed all those Four Noble Truths, and mainly now when we conclude, when we go to the very simple way, truth of suffering is just as a practitioner, as some sentient beings who are living with the sufferings. It's so important to first identify the sufferings, different levels of sufferings. And then as soon as when you're knowing the suffering real, then knowing suffering doesn't mean just I suffer. Knowing suffering means suffering as a suffering. So some kind of suffering we're experiencing, but we don't know these are part of suffering. For instance, mundane pleasures, samsara pleasures. Generally, worldly, it's called the happiness. But for the practitioner, if you really go deep of your heart and research them, these are still part of suffering, the suffering of changing. It's appearing as a pleasure, but it's ended up we're going to turn into the sufferings. So suffering of changing as a suffering, understanding as a suffering is very important. And then pervasive suffering, of course, as long as if you're under the influence of negative emotions or the mental afflictions and contaminated karma, then always experiencing other sufferings. So as long as if you're under the influence of these two causes, then wherever we go, we're still experiencing suffering. It's called the pervasive suffering. It's much more, it's more difficult to identify as a suffering, but if you try and investigate and research and contemplate again and again, then you will find it. So its important thing is each individual, you have to understand from your heart. It's not just people say this. Do your heart really experience? Do you really understand pervasive suffering as a suffering? Then it helps to focus on what you call the path to the liberation. Because pervasive suffering, the main causes is mental afflictions and contaminated karma. These are the two fundamental causes. So our focus is like the purpose of the dharma we engaging, the dharma we studying, the dharma we always taking care or doing things, we learning, we studying, we meditating, all this. The point And why we engaging the Dharma is because the Dharma is the only can able to help us to purify one's own mental afflictions, negative thoughts and emotions, or you can go, cognitive obscuration and afflictive obscurations. The afflictive obscurations are the obstacle who obstruct to achieve the liberation or destroyer or nirvana, and the cognitive obscurations are the obstacle who obstruct to achieve the Buddhahood, enlightenment. So these two obscurations are the fundamental causes. These are the root causes who creates, who brings the suffering uh, uh, each individuals. So in order to free from the suffering, we have to get rid of these obscurations. So in order to purify or eliminate, or in order to uh, clean those obscurations, that the Dharma is the only physical material. Nobody can help us. The money, the power, the reputation, the fame, all these possessions we have, none of this can able to help us to get rid of our inner obscurations, our inner mental afflictions, and the contaminated karma. Only the Dharma. So as a Dharma practitioner, when we say I'm practicing Dharma, which means you applying Dharma within your mind stream to through that try to purify or try to reduce and finally to eliminate those mental afflictions. So when you do that, that's called a Dharma practitioners. Dharma practitioner, which means the person who dealing with one's own mental afflictions, one's own negative thoughts, emotions, which are the fundamental causes of all the sufferings. So that's called the Dharma practitioner. Dharma practitioner doesn't mean, oh, I'm every day reciting the mantra, I'm, go to the temple, doing prostration every day, and I'm offering the mandalas and offering and doing. These are the part of the Dharma. These are, the branches. These are the branch, the root, the main practice. As a, when you say I'm practice the Dharma, which means really who applying the Dharma within one's own mind stream to try to reduce those obscurations or try to slowly try to eliminate. So when you eliminate all your mental obscurations, then it's called victory, right? You become an enlightened being. So the Dharma is like a medicine to cure one's own mental afflictions. So as a practitioner, if your mental afflictions are never changing, never reducing, never change, sometimes it's instead of reducing, if they're increasing, for instance, like, egos, the arrogance, or I take this or this empowerment. I've been meditating for 20 years. I've been doing this or that. I become a great master. I become a Geshe. I blah, blah, blah. You use the name, and through that, it's increasing your egos or arrogance and so forth. That means your Dharma is going on the wrong way. That means Dharma is supposed to be helped to reduce those ego, those selfish, those arrogance. Instead of reducing, if you increasing those inner negative emotions, that means your practice is going in the wrong way. Something mistake. It's wrong. So that's why always as a practitioner, we should always make sure even simple meditation, 5-minute meditation. And how should I use this meditation to reduce my ego, to reduce my selfish, to reduce my anger or hatreds, any negative thoughts, emotion? We need to be always to emphasize, focus one's own mind to how should I reduce that? How should I change my mind? How should I tame my mind through the dharma. So dharma is, it's sort of medicine to one's own mind, to tame, to transforming from negative to positive. So to do this kind of uh, uh, practice, or to able to take your practice into that kind of level, Four Noble Truth, understanding the Four Noble Truth will tremendously help you. Otherwise, without knowing this, all those details, the information, then just doing the practice always just physical, you know, prostration, offering, like all those, rituals, expert in the rituals, you spend all your time into the ritual and nothing internal transformation. There are some people, unfortunately, uh, as a Buddhist, as a practitioner, and they ended up with the practice is just only ritual. Their practice is just only physical, the ritual. So the internal side is nothing changes. So because of lack of understanding the fundamental Buddhist concepts like Four Noble Truths and all this, so that's why the Four Noble Truths are study and what you call experiment. So even small understanding, like a little understanding of Four Noble Truths, should always, apply oneself, research, experiment, because we have these problems. Truth of suffering, truth of origin of sufferings, everything we have that. So we should use that and experiment oneself to try to change this through the Dharma. So the really Dharma, which means what is the Dharma? Dharma is not only like physical material. Dharma is not just some kind of like a textbooks or the statues and all like this. The real true Dharma, which is cessations of one's own mental obscurations, cessations of anger, hatred, attachments, ignorance. We call three roots poison, which are the anger, attachment, and ignorance, right? So cessations of those mental afflictions, that's called the dharma. And to achieve that cessation, to cease those negative thoughts, emotions, just wish alone is not going to cease, right? Wish to get rid of your negative emotion alone is not going to change your negative emotion. And just prayer also, we do usually every day. The prayer alone is not going to cease our negative thoughts, emotions. So who can help us to cease? Who can able to cease those negative emotions? Who can able to antidote to those mental afflictions? Is the path, truth path, among the Four Noble truth paths, which are, the path we call the, what you call the wisdom or understanding the ultimate reality, the bodhicittas, which seeking oneself to achieve enlightenment to sake of all beings. And then as a Lam Rim practitioner, the renunciation, the compassion, the bodhicittas, and all these practices sort of like a truth paths. So the real path we call it's above the seeing path. It's complicated, but gives you a small idea. In order to achieve the enlightenment, this general, in the Mahayana, the vehicle has 5 parts: accumulation parts, preparation parts, and seeing part, and meditation part, no more learning part. So when you achieve the seeing part, meditation part, no more learning part, these are the real dharma. But as a Lam Rim practitioner, we just say the dharma, which means the renunciation, the bodhicitta, the compassion, affection, love, or wisdom, understanding the impermanence, the wisdom of emptiness, and so forth. These are the dharma. When you able to generate within your mind stream this part will be changed, will be transform your mind from negative to positive. Another way, these practice, when they increase, for instance, simple, that when you generate compassion, you know, you can see when your mind, deep of your heart, when your compassions are growing day by day, same time you're self-centered, you're selfish, or your arrogance, or your anger or hatred will day by day reduce. It change, right? Compassion, love and compassion, and bodhicittas, when they increase, you can see those self-centered and all the negative thoughts, mental afflictions are the reduced. It will change. Then to eliminate those mental affliction, then seeing path called the wisdom who understanding the ultimate reality. So the wisdom who understanding the ultimate reality, which another word is called the wisdom of emptiness, or wisdom of understanding the dependent origination, the interconnections. So when you understand the reality, true reality, that will tremendous helps to reduce our mental afflictions, because all our negative thoughts, emotions are based on mind of ego grasping, the ignorance, who grasp the phenomena exist independently, inherently, or exist by its own. So our mind, when they engage to the objects, when they appearing objects in our mind, it's completely different than the way they exist. So appearance and the existence, and the reality, the existence has huge big gap. With the appearing in our minds, everything's solid independently. But whatever we appear in our mind, do they really exist that way? When you investigate, it's very difficult, but you can find it. You can able to understand eventually, slowly. What the things appear, where they exist here, has huge big gap. It's completely opposite. So that kind of misconception, the mystic consciousness, the wrong consciousness, is one of the fundamental causes of anger, hatred, attachment, greediness, and so forth. To get rid of that is only the wisdom of emptiness. So that's why the wisdom of understanding the truth, it's not just visualizing, it's not just, we imagine. We try to understanding the phenomena, how they exist that. So just wants to know the existence of the phenomena, how they exist. We just today we believing based on our appearance, and they have no logic, no reason based on appearance. But the appearance, who knows this is right and wrong? Appearance depend on our perception, the consciousness. So if that perception is mistaken wrong, anything appear will mistake. So that's why it's important to try to investigate, study the Dharma. So Dharma practitioner, number of people might be thinking, or as a Dharma practitioner, go to the quiet place, just meditate, simple, just thinking like simple, meditate alone, and just that's all. When we talk about the Dharma practitioners, from the Buddhist perspective, Buddha says the fundamental causes of our suffering comes from ignorance, wrong consciousness, mistaken perception. So as long as if you polluted by the mistaken, wrong, or ignorance, every appearance, every decisions, every action based on one's mind, that mind is completely polluted by ignorance, then your decision, everything's become mistake, wrong. So decisions mistake, your actions is mistake. So when you mistake, everything apply mistake, you eat it up in a mistake place, mistake rooms. So samsara, that's why we're suffering. So to get rid of this suffering, we have to fix our mind. That fundamental cause is the ignorance. To overcome the ignorance, just simple quiet sitting there is not change that. Ignorance, which means not understanding, not knowing what is the truth. Or ignorance, which means who believe, who grasping, who apprehending completely wrong than the way the reality is. So that's called the ignorance. So to get rid of ignorance, it's only the wisdom, perception, who perceive, who cognize, right? The reality, the wisdom, that's the only can able to move or remove that ignorance. To grow the wisdom, in order to grow the wisdom, just simple breathing meditation or not thinking anything, keep your mind as blank. There are the number of people might think meditation on emptiness, which means not think anything, don't think any. So it means another word is just keep your mind is blank. Keeping one's mind blank, how is developing wisdom? That means you're not knowing anything, not knowing how should they remove the ignorance. In order to remove the ignorance, you have to cognize, you have to understand. So to grow the wisdom, growing the wisdom is through education, learn, study, knowledge, education. So that's why as a practitioner, Dharma education is so important. If this is not big deal, it's simple, just keep your mind is blank and that's think this is the fundamental, like a main the practice you achieve enlightenment, living with a blank mind, not thinking anything, and doesn't mean I'm saying this is rubbish. It can help you to stop all those, what you call the distraction thoughts and so forth at that moment, right? But this alone, that doesn't mean this is the highest Buddhist view or something. That's what the problem people sometimes misunderstand is of keeping mind, the blank is the emptiness meditation. Huge big mistake. So if Dharma, I mentioned the Dharma, which is not need to study, just simple these kind of things, then why the Buddha taught all this practice, hold this book, why he wrote this. Even in Tibetan language, we have just directly from the Buddha, we have 101 volume, it's called the Kajuru, the Sutra. And each volume has maybe 400 to 500 pages. It's a huge, big. So after education, to grow the wisdom, study, educate, research, investigate, experiment, then meditate. So that's the way to grow our wisdom. Through that, we can able to remove our mental afflictions. So to do this kind of things, the Four Noble Truth is the fundamental, understanding the suffering and the origin of suffering, then knowing there is a cessation of suffering. So it's not easy, some people might think human nature is anger, human nature is greed, human nature is very attachments. There are many people thinking that our nature is so much greed, so much angry, so much competition. We think that way. So as long as when you're thinking this is human nature, that means there's no cessation. You can't cease those anger and greed and attachment because this is your nature. So as soon as if you have that kind of belief system, then the Dharma practice is impossible. Dharma, we engage in the Dharma to get rid of our mental affliction. And this is our nature. If you feel this is nature, then how should you get rid of? It's impossible to wish to free from them. Impossible to feel like I can achieve liberation. It's no. If you don't have wishes to achieve liberations and so forth, then your practice is for what is the point? So the number of people practicing, I'm talking here as from the Buddhist perspective, they're practicing, they themselves consider as a Buddhist and they're doing the prayer. That's why some people, all those practice they use for mundane pleasure. Or I need to success my business. Or I have to find good husband or the wife to my children. Or I have to have something, blah, blah, good business. Or blah, blah, this or that. I need to be, I have to be rich. I have the money. So that's why I pray to the Buddha. I invite the monks to do the prayer. All your practice is for the mundane. If the people thinking like that, that means this is from the real practitioner. This is not real true Buddhist practice, because all those teaching the Buddha taught us, I mentioned earlier, it's the simple Four Noble Truths. We have to put it. And among the Four Noble Truths, these mundane pleasures are part of suffering of changing. So the main our causes of suffering is mental affliction. So who's your mental affliction? Not somebody else. Your mental affliction is your fundamental causes of suffering. Your negative thoughts, emotions, is your fundamental causes of suffering. To get rid of your mental affliction, you have to do it, not somebody. Who can able to take out your negative thoughts, emotions? It's impossible, right? Who will able to take my anger, my hatreds? It's impossible. It's only the self can able to do that. So that's why we engage into dharma, to apply that dharma to get rid of this. So if your causes of sufferings are completely purified, cease them, completely eliminate, the result, there's no suffering. If you don't want to suffering, you have to get rid of these causes. If you don't deal with the causes, just only working with the suffering, you can chop it for the moment, the next time it will come again and again, again. So it's never changed. It comes again and again. So that's why we have to get rid of the fundamental causes. That's why we apply the Dharma. The Dharma practitioner, when we consider as I'm doing the practice, which means really you focus one's own negative thoughts, emotions. So to do these kind of things, the nature of human beings, I mentioned earlier, the Buddhist belief, all sentient beings has a Buddha natures. These kind of educations are so important. So Buddha natures and our nature of our each and individuals, each and all beings, the mind is really pure. Negative emotions are the temporarily its surface. It just comes and goes. These are not our nature. They engage in our mind, but they are not engaging in nature of our minds. So these all things have to use the logic. There's a reason, the logic to really it makes sense. To my nature is really, really pure, or my nature is anger. So do you really know that? So to knowing detail these things are, I think the emptiness the philosophy is so important. It really helps us to understanding much deeper our nature. So when you're knowing that, then freedom of negative emotions is the possible. Those mental afflictions are the temporarily. It comes, but it can goes, comes and goes. Human nature is not those mental negative emotions. It's not our nature. Because as an anger, sometimes when the conditions, circumstances arises, we feel angry. Then slowly it can disappear. So if this is in our nature, then always we have to be angry. It's always been have to be together, but it's not. It comes and goes. So it's not in the nature. Like a nature of sky is very pure, but the clouds comes, make trouble, tsunami, hurricanes, and all these things, then it goes. But it doesn't mean the nature of sky is unpure or something, right? Similarly, nature. But these things are first study, investigate, and really experiment, then when you really believe there are something, the cessations of one's own mental afflictions that exist, if you have really confidence, decision, confidence from deep of your heart, that cessations of one's own mental afflictions, in other words, the liberation, is existent there, it's possible there, then in order to achieve that, through paths. So that's why we need to achieve engaging to the truth paths, which you mentioned earlier, those three principal aspects of the paths, which call renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom of emptiness, and so forth. These are the really, really powerful the practice and really huge benefit, if you really understanding and do daily. Again, of course, first it's very, very difficult. But if your mind is just not give up and be continuously doing practice, it can become a familiar day by day. Eventually, it's just, become your nature, the renunciation and so forth. So if you renounce 24 hours your mind in these mundane pleasures, you can see your concept, your vision, your focus is completely changed, difference. So external things going up and down, roller coaster, it's not going to affect your mental. Your mind always remain very calm and stable. Your focus is completely internal, not on all this external alone. Your focus is very much internally because you're always very much sensitive in one's own mind, what those negative emotions. So you're very much concerned about that. So always you're looking if any negative emotions arises, you're always seeing how should stop that, how should remove that, how should reduce that, which kind of practice. You're always looking at that. So external things, when the things going wrong, when you see something strange and bad things, and when you see and hear, it's because of that. When you feel mental unhappy, unpleasure, through that it can increase your brings anger or hatred and so forth. When this emotion arises, you already know that. You already worry about that. You fully first apply how should I stop these mental afflictions. So that's why you're practicing. So you're practicing the Dharma to get rid of one's own mental afflictions. So day by day, when you're reducing your mental afflictions day by day, you can see your action, your decision, everything's change, better and better and better. That's why it changed the human being, negative, bad human being into the good human beings. The good human being doesn't mean you have a nice family, you have money, you're a very powerful person, or you're very famous. That doesn't mean that. Good human beings, which means warm hearts and good actions. Always act nice, respect, positive, and always think positives. So warm-heartedness with the perfect behave. If you live on that kind of life, this life much happier, much more peaceful. Of course, in the next life, much better life you achieve. So that kind of transformation, how should we do? Through the renunciation. So how should we generate renunciation? Through understanding for Four Noble Truths, meditations on Four Noble Truths, and through that, generate renunciation. So that when you achieve the renunciation, which means the mind who's seeking oneself, it's simple definition of seeking oneself liberate, and oneself liberates. But just talk that looks, it's easy. Everybody wants to achieve the liberations. So seeking oneself to achieve the liberation, that wishes, how should we develop? What kind of wishes we talk about? Is the first understanding all this samsara, mundane, specific, the mundane pleasures, the worldly pleasures. For you, is still part of suffering. The nature of all these mundane pleasures are part of suffering. Do you really know that? Do you really understand? Do you really believe that? Most of us still not. How we know? Because we still attach so much. So we want this, we want that. When we lose these things, we're angry, we're sad. So we're so much attached to want to achieve this because we don't know. We think this is the pleasure that we think. So if the mundane pleasures are the real pleasure, then of course when we achieve, when we got it, we have to be full satisfied, full happy. But these mundane pleasures, for instance, like simple, what should you use? The car. So one fancy cars. So looks many people seeking oneself to get this fancy car. So the fancy car is for the mundane, for the samsara. This is the pleasure. So to got this. So when you got this fancy car, if this is a real happiness, when we got it, we have to be full satisfied. We have to be full of happy pleasure, right? Then when you use it, you have to be more happier because this is a real happiness. If this is happiness, then when you use it again, and you have to be more happier. But it's completely different. It's not that way. When we first got it, from deep of our heart, we feel joy, we feel happy. Same time, that moment behind in your mind, you have a concern, you have a worry. You have to pay for the gas, you have to pay for the insurance, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. Even the simple, because of that car. When you park into your street, one part of your mind, you always worry. Somebody will scratch that. Somebody will steal that. It disturbs in your mind continuously. If this is real happiness, then of course when you always have to be joy. But it's not. Because of having that, you have a concern, you have worry. Then, day by day when you use, getting more, then it's getting more problems. You have to fix this, you have to do this, you have to do so many things. Because of this thing, and you're mentally, you also have stress, you also have worry, you also have to do many things before you have that. So you can see these are not really ultimate happiness. The ultimate peace, when we talk about what is really that, is cessation of suffering. We talk about talking about. If you cease your anger, if you cease your attachments, cessation of attachments never brings any worry, never brings any what you call stress, fear, worry. Never. When you live with these kind of cessations, full of satisfaction. Today, tomorrow, how long are you going to stay with them? Never brings. You're becoming more happier. You can see even the simple in your family, within the family, without anger, hatred each other. One day, how much happy, right? It never brings problems. Next day, 1 week, 1 month, your unity of family, harmony of family is growing more. Never brings stress and worry. Because of not having anger, I'm stressed. Impossible. Because of luxury car, I stress. Possible. That's possible, right? Because of not having anger and hatred and negative emotions, never brings stress. So real happiness, which means the cessations of these negative thoughts, emotions. So, as a practitioners, through understanding this deep of your heart, you're always seeking oneself, because of our nature, we always want to live happy. That's human nature. So the problem is we don't know what is the happiness. That's the problems. So the having wish to achieve happiness is human nature. But what is happiness? That's why this attachment, they attack our brain. So the brain gives us a message. This is happiness. What is that? Money. This is happiness. What is that? Material. This is happiness. What is that? Wife, husband, blah, blah, blah. All those materials showing this is happiness. That's created by attachments. The attachment take advantages. Because of our nature of our heart, we're seeking happiness. We don't want suffering. So attachment comes over that. This is happiness. So this shows completely mistake path, attachments, anger, all those negative thoughts, emotions. So that's why we're doing for happiness. Everybody, our whole movement, everything we're doing is for happiness. But do we really achieve happy? Do we really achieve pleasure and joy? Not. Still problem, still worry, still all these pains and sufferings we experience. So the method we choose is something wrong, mistake, because those methods created by one's own negative emotions, attachments, basically. So that's why to get rid of these things is understanding of Four Noble Truths, specific all the samsara, suffering of all the samsara. So when you're knowing every samsara pleasures and everything we will see today, these are part of suffering. From your deep of your heart, when you really knows that, it helps you control your attachment towards these objects. If you have 10 different objects to attach, you lose 10 freedom. If you have 100 different objects to attach, you lose 100 different freedom. Your mind is stuck into these objects. So when you're stuck into this object, you lose your freedom. So that's why it creates, when the things, object change up and down, it affects our mind. Stress, fear, joy, fall down, up, down, all this, our mind is, very unstable distraction mind because of this. Mind was stuck under the objects. So knowing all these mundane pleasure is part of the suffering, it helps to control one's own attachments. Then when you're knowing all those mistaken things I'm seeing, everything I'm thinking, it comes from one's own attachments, one's own negative thoughts, emotion. So then when you're knowing, as long as if you're living under the influence of these mind, you always end up with a problem. So you have very strong sense of wish to free from one's own negative emotion. Another way is liberation. Liberation is freedom of one's own mental afflictions. So seeking oneself to achieve that. If my mind is completely free from all those mental afflictions, I don't need to experience suffering because there's no causes of suffering. Without causes, results are impossible, right? Cause and effect of relationship between cause and effect, called the law of causality, or the karma systems. If there's no causes, there's no results. So if there's something results, problem, mistake, or suffering, that means something wrong in the causes. So that's why, understanding, knowing all these things helps you to generate the renunciation. And if you go to much detail about first two truths, truth of suffering and truth of origin of suffering, then as a Lam Rim practice, they call 12 link of interdependent origination. The 12 link of interdependent origination will help us, to understanding much better first two truths. So what are the 12 link? The first, ignorance. And second is karma. So the karma, or we can say what you call from the translation here called compositional activities, which is the karma action. So compositional activity. So ignorance, compositional activity, consciousness. Third is consciousness, which is Fourth is name and forms. And ngaba Geshe. Sixth source, Tuparepa. Sixth is contact, and the seven is feeling, Sepa, which is the eight is craving, Lempa is the ninth contact, and Juba Siba, which the 10th is called potential existence, or potential existence is karma becoming much more powerful, potential existence. And Jujiba Gyawa is the 11 is birth, and then 12, the last is death and dying. So death and aging, or so these are the 12 link: ignorance, compositional activities, consciousness, name and form, six souls which are eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mental. Six souls, and whatever, contact, and then feeling. Then after the feeling is the grasping. Feeling, not feeling. Feeling, then after feeling, craving. Craving, after that, grasping. So the craving and graspings are the part of attachment, grasping. Then after potential existence, and then aging and death. So these are the six causes and six results are the way we circling in samsara by this 12 link of interdependent origination. So knowing those 12 link of interdependent origination can also help us to generate the renunciation. So maybe today we don't have that much time to, maybe next time we'll talk about it a little bit about the 12 link. But in case, you should read the 12 link of interdependent. What is the ignorance? What is the compositional activities? What is the consciousness? So there's a two-way. Simple way, through the Four Noble Truth, you generate renunciation. If somebody wants to go to more detail, then apply the 12 link of interdependent origination. Through that, you should generate renunciation. Purpose, either 12 link of interdependent, either just simple Four Noble Truth. Whatever you study, whatever you're doing, research, meditate, focus, main purpose is through that generate the renunciation. That's the main purpose. So sometimes you knowing completely, exactly, very well about the 12 link of interdependent origination, but that didn't change your mind. Your mind's never transforming into the renunciation. So your mind is, never changed, then it's useless. So always, when you're learning that, you have to make sure I'm learning this. Point is to generate renunciation. So the small scopes and medium scopes, the Lam Rim, where we study, our main focus, the point of these two scopes is main point is to develop renunciation. That's the main focus. So that's why the small scope, the practice is a preliminary for generate renunciation, and the medium scope will gives you full package of the renunciation. Detailed information about the Four Noble Truth and 12 link of interdependent originations, and through that renunciation. And when you really achieve the renunciation, then the path. Now you part one, another part we call from the specific for the renunciation when you achieve to liberate, liberate oneself from the mental afflictions. Generally, we talk about three principal aspects of the path and so forth. Specific in medium scope, specific in according with this practice, we apply three trainings. So the three higher training, we call Lapasum. So Lapasum, which means 3 higher training. The first, the morality, Tritim Kilaba, the moral discipline, the higher training of moral discipline. And the second, Ingin Sikilapa in Tibetan, which means higher training of concentration, Samadhi. And the third, the higher training of wisdom, Gyan, or it's called Gyan or something, right? So the moral discipline and Shila in Sanskrit is called the Tsutin. So this is the basic. So the moral discipline, we focus, to discipline oneself, your physical action, your speech, fully control to discipline. Then when you discipline the physical, through the moral, if you live your life as very moral, your concentration become much easier. When you become a very strong concentrate, your wisdom become very sharp and very active. So that's why the 3 principle will comes, 3 higher training will comes later after the renunciations. So these are the the practice of the medium scopes. So now a little bit information about the 12 link. The first, the marikpa, which means ignorance. The ignorance I mentioned earlier. Ignorance have 2. The one ignorance, which means not knowing. Not knowing is also the problems, right? Second ignorance is you grasping, you apprehending, you believing something which is completely mistake, completely wrong, much worse ignorance. So if you want to go to the one place like a Durban, then if you think Durban is this way, or maybe first you think you live in Johannesburg, you want to go to the Durban, you don't know the road, which way I need to use. Not knowing, living with that ignorance, you will not going to, arrive in the Durban. You will not going to achieve there. So living with this ignorance, you're stuck. So the first, to get rid of this ignorance, right? Not knowing is the fundamental causes. Then there's nothing. You have very good car, you have everything, but you don't know the road, how should go there. Not knowing the road, you will not going to get there. So that's first ignorance. Like that, if you don't know, not knowing is the one of the causes of all those mistakes. You never ever achieve success living with not knowing. That's why the ignorance. Another ignorance, you think Durban is this road. The Durban may be in the left road, you believing Durban is the right side of the road. So when you drive in this way, each moment, each second, you are getting far, far, far to the Durban. Instead of closer to the Durban, getting far. Much worse ignorance, where you believe is completely wrong and mistake the reality, right? So living with this kind of ignorance, you're going to lead to more difficult. So the second ignorance is the mistaken, the wrong view, wrong consciousness is much worse ignorance. So when we talk about among the 12 link of interdependent origination, the ignorance, which is the second ignorance, the wrong view. The wrong view has different types. Fundamental, the wrong view is mind of ego grasping, which I mentioned earlier. The mind of ego grasping, the mind who grasp, who believe self, all those phenomena, the object we see, we hear, all these phenomena, we believe they all exist independently, inherently, which means who exists by its own, exists itself, themselves, without labels or imputed or designated by names and thoughts. Things exist themselves. That kind of grasping, the ignorance, the fundamental causes of all the sufferings. Wrong consciousness, mistaken consciousness. So I give this detailed information. Some of you have my book. So my book, where you read it, the Reducing Suffering, has quite the detailed information about this ignorance. So the ignorance, which is one of the fundamental causes, and it's very hard to know, very hard to even know that we have. But problem is we don't know. It's very hard to recognize amount of self-grasping, amount of ego-grasping, where they grasp the phenomena. What kind of phenomena we grasp, we still don't know. So that's why the first, this topic will come later. The intro of this Lam Rim practice will talk about the emptiness, but most of you already hear before many times. So I can give you simple, information. The detail comes into the Lam Rim practice. So it's the mind we have right now, where we grasping like self, we've been always thinking something there, right, solid, independently, which means looks like it's pointable, who exists like a pointable or the findable, solid, absolute, who exists objectively. That kind of grasping we have. Because of that, when the objects appear very attractive, we is really stuck into that object, that specific object. We attach. The object appears very unattractive, very negative way. We feel hate. So hate to this object, but this object for our mind, where they appear looks like solid from there, that's why it's easily attached, easily angered. All this, on the objects. We never think these objects are not exist from its own. But not exist by its own doesn't mean they are not exist. They are exist. Existing through our experience. We know that. Things exist, we feel. We feel happy, we feel suffering, pleasure, unpleasure. Something exists. But go and investigate yourself, your head to toe, go and live and break it down and look. You never found it yourself through your body, through your mind. It's called through 5 aggregates. So the heart sura we talk about, right? The 5 aggregates are the empty. So through your 5 aggregates, which are aggregates of body, aggregates of feeling, aggregates of discrimination, aggregates of composition of factors, aggregates of consciousness. None of these 5 is you. You are not of them, right? None of these 5, you. Without those 5 aggregates, there's no self. But self exists based on those 5 aggregates. So we label, we imputed self on the basis of those 5 aggregates. Because it's not findable. So that means they not exist by themselves. They not exist by its own. They are dependent on these. That means through the investigation, it's not findable. It will going to be disappear. So the ultimate reality, real, way the nature of their reality is the empty of exist by themselves. That's called the emptiness. Empty of inherently independent existence. That doesn't mean nothing and non-existence. That means they not exist by themselves. That's why they exist dependently, dependent, interconnection, relatively, non from themselves. That's the reality. But it's hard to know that. The ignorance we have is the mind of ego grasping, is the ignorance among the 12 link of interdependence. We are circling in samsara because of the root causes is ignorance. Living without of this ignorance, then our actions comes always mistake. That's why we act. We full of ignorance. One ignorance is that, and second ignorance we call the ignorance of not understanding of law of causality, the karmic system. So the not knowing the karmic system will create so much problems. Like the many problems we creating because of not knowing the karmic. If you really understand the karmic system, so we really hesitate to act negative. If I act negative, it will bring the results suffering. So if your heart is really not knowing that, it helps to prevent those bad actions. So we act bad because one is we don't know this action will bring suffering. So we act it, and those actions comes from ignorance and anger, hatred, all those negative emotions. The ignorance, not ignorance on the karmic system, ignorance of the reality is the first among the 12 link of interdependence, first ignorance. Living with this ignorance, then our actions always mistake, wrong. It's called compositional factor. Second, so we act on based on this ignorance, based on this negative emotion, our good action, bad action, both of those actions are contaminated actions. We can do good things, nice things, but these are still contaminated because the action based on ignorance still there. Out of ignorance, we still have something good behavior we can do, something good things, but still we have this mind of ego grasping, right? So second compensational factor is the action. Then third, the consciousness. So that action, we think we acted is finished. Not. These are the actions, are the now causes. Of these are the seeds will brings you the result. So these seeds, where they stays, is remain on our mind, consciousness. The consciousness, like a straw house consciousness, storing all those imprint, all those seeds. You act it, you put the seeds in your mind. When you negative act, you put the seeds in so your consciousness hosting all those seeds of the actions. So they host it. That's why the third consciousness. Oh, now it's already 10:30. So, yeah, we'll talk about next time other 12 link of interdependence. And the good thing is you should read it. There are many books available in 12 link of interdependent origination. So if you go detail, that's very nice, beautiful. And when you can see these days there's art, what you call the wheel of life. So wheel of life, when they draw the wheel of life, the last circle, that's the 12 link of interdependence. So that's objects. There's a picture inside there. It's explaining about the 12 link of interdependence with the beautiful arts. So wheel of life have a detailed information about the 12 link of interdependence also. Okay, now today we're going to leave here, and then next time we're going to continuously in 12 link of interdependence, and then after that renunciation and 3 higher training. Then we'll finish the medium scopes. Then we'll go into beginning the great scopes the next time. Okay, that's today. Thank you very much.